Katie Johnson walked through the crowded halls of Nexus Prime Trading Station with her tablet clutched against her chest. The 19-year-old human girl moved carefully between the massive alien beings that towered over her small frame. Her brown hair was pulled back in a neat ponytail, and her simple blue diplomatic uniform made her look even younger than she was. The trading station buzzed with activity as creatures from dozens of different worlds conducted business. Katie had been working here for 6 months as a junior translator for the human diplomatic team. She was good at languages and even better at staying quiet and observing everything around her. Most of the aliens barely noticed her as she passed by. To them, she was just another weak human from the newly discovered species that had joined the galactic community only 5 years ago. The other species called humans Deathworlders as a joke because while Earth was considered dangerous, the aliens thought its people were soft and fragile. Katie reached the main conference room, where Ambassador Roy Mitchell was preparing for another round of trade negotiations. The 60-year-old diplomat looked tired and stressed as he reviewed the documents on his desk. He glanced up when Katie entered and gave her a weak smile. "Good morning, Katie," Ambassador Mitchell said as he straightened his tie. "Are you ready for another fun day of getting pushed around by our galactic neighbors?" Katie nodded and took her usual seat at the small table beside the ambassador's chair. Her job was to translate any languages that the universal translator devices might miss and to take detailed notes of everything that was said. She was very good at both tasks, but what she excelled at most was watching and listening. The conference room doors opened with a loud hiss and the Carvex delegation entered. Katie felt the temperature in the room seem to drop as Warlord Zephron Keth walked in, followed by his advisors. The massive alien stood 8 feet tall with dark gray armored skin that looked like it could stop a missile. His claws were as long as Katie's fingers, and his yellow eyes scanned the room like a predator looking for prey. Zephron had never lost a battle in his entire life. The Carvex Empire had been expanding across 3 sectors of space under his leadership, and every species in the galaxy either feared him or wanted to ally with his people. His reputation for crushing enemies in single combat was legendary. "Ambassador Mitchell," Zephron said in his deep, rumbling voice as he took his seat across from the human delegation. The chair groaned under his weight. "I trust you have considered our generous offer regarding the mining rights to your 3 colony worlds." Katie watched Ambassador Mitchell's jaw tighten, but his voice remained diplomatic. "Warlord Zephron, we appreciate the Carvex Empire's interest in our worlds, but the terms you have proposed are not acceptable to the human government." Zephron's claws drummed against the metal table, creating small scratches in the surface. "Perhaps you misunderstand the nature of this negotiation, Ambassador. This is not a request. The Carvex Empire requires those resources, and we will have them one way or another." Other alien delegations had gathered to watch the meeting. Katie noticed how they whispered among themselves and pointed at the human table. Some looked amused, while others seemed to pity the humans for having to face Zephron's demands. None of them offered support or showed any intention of helping. "The human colonies are protected under galactic law," Ambassador Mitchell said, though his voice lacked confidence. "We have the right to refuse unfair trade agreements." Zephron leaned forward and his massive frame cast a shadow over the human delegation. "Laws are for those strong enough to enforce them, Ambassador. Your species has been part of our galactic community for only 5 years. You have no allies here and no military force capable of challenging the Carvex Empire." Katie watched the exchange while taking notes on her tablet. She saw how Ambassador Mitchell's hands shook slightly as he tried to maintain his composure. She noticed how the other alien species in the room seemed to enjoy watching the humans squirm under Zephron's pressure. Most importantly, she observed everything about Zephron himself. The way he moved told her a lot about his fighting style. He favored his right side slightly when he gestured, which suggested an old injury to his left shoulder. His breathing was controlled and measured, like someone who had spent years in combat training. When he was about to make a threat, his yellow eyes would narrow just a fraction of a second before he spoke. "Your mining operation on Kepler 447 will cease within 30 days, Zephron continued. Your colony on New Austin will surrender 70% of its rare earth deposits to Carvex mining ships. Your third world Ross 128 will become a Carvex protectorate under our direct control. Ambassador Mitchell looked around the room hoping for support from the other delegations, but found only indifferent stares and barely concealed amusement. The Vorthan crystal beings seemed particularly entertained by the humans' distress. The gas giant dwellers floated in their environmental suits and made what sounded like laughter. "And if we refuse?" Ambassador Mitchell asked, though they all knew the answer. Zephron's mouth opened in what might have been a smile revealing rows of sharp teeth. "Then we will take what we need by force, and your colonies will suffer greatly in the process. Your people will learn why the galaxy respects Carvex strength." Katie felt something cold settle in her stomach as she listened to the Warlord's casual threats against human civilians. She had friends on those colony worlds, including her cousin, Jake, who worked in the mines on Kepler 447. But she kept her expression neutral and continued taking notes. The ambassador looked defeated as he realized he had no choice but to accept the unreasonable terms. The human government had sent him here to negotiate fair trade agreements, not to surrender entire worlds to alien empires. But without military support or galactic allies, there was nothing he could do to stop Zephron. "We will need time to consider your terms," Ambassador Mitchell said weakly. "You have until tomorrow morning," Zephron replied as he stood from his chair. "I suggest you use that time wisely, Ambassador. The Carvex Empire's patience has limits." As the alien delegations began to file out of the conference room, Katie remained seated and continued watching. She saw how Zephron moved when he thought no one was paying attention. She noticed the slight limp in his left leg that he tried to hide. She observed how his armored skin had tiny gaps near the joints where different plates met. Most importantly, she saw how every other species in the room looked at humans with either pity or contempt. They all assumed that humans would simply roll over and accept whatever demands were made of them. They thought humans were weak because they came from a dangerous world but had somehow survived by being timid and avoiding conflict. They had no idea how wrong they were about that. The next morning brought chaos to Nexus Prime as news spread through every deck and corridor of the massive trading station. Warlord Zephron had made an announcement that would change everything for every species present. Katie heard about it first from the excited chatter of alien traders as she walked to the diplomatic quarters for her morning briefing. Ambassador Mitchell was pacing in his office when Katie arrived. His usually neat appearance was disheveled, and his coffee cup sat untouched on his desk, growing cold. He looked up when she entered, and his face showed a mixture of anger and desperation that Katie had never seen before. "Have you heard about this gladiatorial contest nonsense?" the ambassador asked as he continued pacing. "Zephron announced it an hour ago, and the entire station is going crazy with excitement." Katie shook her head and waited for him to explain. She had learned that staying quiet and letting people talk was often the best way to gather information. Ambassador Mitchell was clearly upset and needed to vent his frustrations to someone. "The Warlord has declared that each species will send a champion to fight in single combat," Mitchell continued. "The winners' people get favorable trade status for the next 10 years, while the losers face economic sanctions that could destroy their civilizations. It is barbaric and completely outside normal diplomatic protocols." The ambassador stopped pacing and slumped into his chair. "Of course, Zephron will represent the Carvex Empire himself. The man has never lost a fight in his entire life. His record is 847 victories with 0 defeats. He has killed some of those opponents with his bare hands." Katie absorbed this information while maintaining her calm exterior, but inside she felt her pulse quicken. She had spent her entire life on Earth before coming to work at the trading station, and she knew things about human capabilities that most aliens did not understand. The problem was that no one would believe her if she tried to explain. "What other species are participating?" Katie asked quietly. "Ambassador." Mitchell pulled up a list on his computer screen and read from it with growing dismay. "The Vorthan are sending their crystal berserker who has never been broken in combat. The gas giant dwellers are sending their plasma-wielding champion who can melt through solid steel. The machine species is contributing their most advanced combat unit with enough firepower to level a city block. He continued down the list, naming warrior after warrior from species that had been bred for conflict over thousands of years. Each champion represented the peak of their species, combat evolution, and had training that spanned decades or even centuries depending on their lifespan. "We have no one who could possibly stand against opponents like these," Mitchell said as he put his head in his hands. "Our security team consists of 5 officers trained for crowd control, not gladiatorial combat against alien super soldiers. Our military personnel are all back on Earth or protecting the colonies." Katie listened to the ambassador's despair while her mind worked through possibilities. She had grown up in Detroit, which was not exactly a safe neighborhood even by Earth standards. She had played competitive soccer through high school, which meant 4 years of constant physical training and learning to read opponents' movements. More importantly, she had spent 6 months observing every alien species on this station and learning their strengths and weaknesses. "What happens if we do not participate?" Katie asked. "Automatic forfeit, which means we accept the worst possible trade terms," Mitchell replied. "Zephron made it clear that non-participation will be seen as cowardice, and the Carvex Empire will treat us accordingly. Other species will follow their lead, and humanity will become a pariah in galactic politics." The ambassador stood and walked to the window that looked out over the trading station's main deck. Thousands of aliens moved through the corridors below, conducting business and preparing for the spectacle that would take place in the arena. Katie could see the excitement in their movements as they anticipated watching various species prove their dominance through violence. "I have to send a message to Earth requesting instructions," Mitchell said. "Maybe they can rush a military specialist here in time, but I doubt it. The contest is scheduled for tomorrow afternoon, and the fastest ship would take 3 days to reach us." Katie made her decision. She had been watching and learning for months, and she understood things about this situation that no one else did. The aliens saw humans as weak because they misunderstood what being from a death world actually meant. They thought dangerous planets produced fragile inhabitants who survived by hiding and avoiding conflict. "Ambassador Mitchell," Katie said quietly, "I would like to volunteer as humanity's champion." The ambassador turned from the window with such speed that he nearly knocked over his coffee cup. His expression showed complete shock, followed quickly by concern and something that might have been panic. "Katie, that is absolutely out of the question," he said firmly. "You are 19 years old and work as a translator. These are trained killers from warrior species that have dominated the galaxy for millennia. You would be committing suicide." "With respect, sir, someone has to represent humanity," Katie replied in the same calm tone she always used. "You said yourself that we have no other options, and refusing to participate will destroy our standing in galactic politics." Mitchell sat back down heavily and stared at her as if she had suggested flying to the nearest star. "Katie, I appreciate your courage, but this is not some diplomatic negotiation where we can talk our way out of trouble. These beings will try to kill you with their bare hands, and they have the training and physical advantages to succeed." Katie had expected this reaction, but she also knew that Ambassador Mitchell was a practical man who understood impossible situations. She decided to give him just enough information to make him consider her proposal without revealing too much about human capabilities. "I have been observing all of these species for 6 months," she said. "I know their fighting styles, their strengths, and their weaknesses. I also know things about human physiology that they do not understand. We may have a better chance than you think." The ambassador studied her face for a long moment, trying to determine if she was serious or if the stress of the situation had affected her judgment. Katie met his gaze steadily and waited for him to process what she had said. Finally, Mitchell sighed and activated his computer terminal. "I will send the request to Earth for guidance, but you may be right that we have no other choice. If they approve your participation, then God help us all, because I think we are about to make a terrible mistake." The arena on Nexus Prime had been built to accommodate any species in the galaxy, and today it buzzed with an energy that Katie could feel in her bones. Thousands of aliens filled the seats that surrounded the central fighting area, and their excited Voices created a deafening roar that echoed off the metal walls. Katie sat in the preparation area trying to block out the noise and focus on what she had observed during the preliminary matches. The first fight had been between the Vorthen Crystal Berserker and a warrior from the Insectoid Hive Collective. Katie watched through the viewing screen as the massive crystalline being charged across the arena floor with earth-shaking force. The Berserker stood 12 feet tall and his body was made of living crystal that could supposedly withstand any impact. His opponent was a 6-armed insect warrior with razor-sharp claws and lightning-fast reflexes. The fight lasted less than 30 seconds. The Berserker absorbed every strike from the insect warrior's claws without taking any visible damage, then grabbed his opponent with both massive hands and simply crushed him. The crowd roared its approval as the Vorthen champion stood over the broken remains of his enemy and raised his arms in victory. Katie had seen something during those 30 seconds that no one else noticed. When the insect warrior struck the Berserker's left shoulder area, the crystal being had flinched slightly and shifted his weight to compensate. It was such a small movement that it would be invisible to most observers, but Katie had been watching for exactly that kind of detail. The Berserker had an old injury or a weak point in his crystal structure that he was trying to protect. The second match featured the gas giant dweller's plasma champion against a heavily armored warrior from the mining guild. The plasma wielder floated in his environmental suit, and his attacks came in the form of superheated energy blasts that could melt through solid metal. His opponent tried to use his armor and shield to get close enough for hand combat, but never had a chance. The plasma blasts carved through the armored warrior's defenses like a hot knife through butter. Within minutes, the mining guild champion was nothing but melted slag on the arena floor. The crowd cheered even louder as the gas giant dweller's champion hovered over his victory and prepared energy charges for his next opponent. Katie had timed the plasma wielder's attacks and noticed a pattern that would be crucial if she faced him. Each energy blast required a 3-second charging period followed by a 2-second cooldown where the alien was vulnerable. The environmental suit also had visible power cables that looked like they could be damaged if someone could get close enough. The third fight was the most brutal yet. The machine species had sent a combat unit that looked like a walking tank with multiple weapon systems and armor plating thick enough to stop artillery shells. Its opponent was an acid-spitting creature from a swamp world whose natural weapons had dissolved entire armies in previous conflicts. The machine warrior's tactical programming was flawless. It analyzed the acid spitter's attack patterns in real time and adapted its strategy accordingly. When the organic warrior tried to melt through the machine's armor, the combat unit simply switched to ranged weapons and systematically dismantled its opponent from a safe distance. The fight ended when the machine warrior's plasma cannon vaporized what was left of the acid spitter. Katie noticed that the machine's movements followed predictable algorithmic patterns. Its tactical program was advanced, but it relied on probability calculations and past data to make decisions. A truly random or illogical fighting style might be able to confuse its programming long enough to find a weakness in its armor or weapon. Systems. Between matches, Katie remained in her preparation area and declined all offers of weapons or armor from Ambassador Mitchell and the human security team. She had changed out of her diplomatic uniform into simple athletic clothing that would allow for maximum freedom of movement. Her brown hair was tied back in the same ponytail she had worn for every soccer practice in high school. "Katie, you still have time to reconsider this," Ambassador Mitchell said as he sat down beside her. "No one would think less of you for withdrawing from the contest. These opponents are beyond anything a human should be expected to face." Katie looked at the ambassador and gave him a small smile. "I appreciate your concern, sir, but I've been preparing for this my entire life without knowing it. Growing up in Detroit and playing competitive sports taught me things that might be useful here." The ambassador shook his head in confusion. "I do not understand how street experience and high school athletics could possibly prepare you for combat against galactic super warriors. You will see," Katie replied quietly as she watched the arena being prepared for the next set of matches. These aliens are impressive fighters, but they all have the same weakness. They rely too heavily on their natural advantages, and they underestimate opponents who do not fit their expectations. A loud announcement echoed through the preparation area, calling for the remaining champions to report for the elimination rounds. Katie stood and stretched her muscles the same way she had before every soccer game. Her movements were fluid and controlled, showing none of the nervousness that Ambassador Mitchell felt watching her. "Katie," the ambassador said as she prepared to leave, "whatever happens out there, I want you to know that Earth is proud of you for volunteering. You have shown more courage than anyone should be asked to demonstrate." Katie paused at the door and looked back at him. "Ambassador Mitchell, when this is over, I think the galaxy is going to learn something important about humans that they did not expect. We are not weak because we come from a dangerous world. We are dangerous because we come from a world that made us adapt or die." She walked through the corridor toward the arena entrance, passing alien warriors who towered over her small frame. Some of them laughed when they saw her, while others simply ignored the human girl who looked like she had wandered into the wrong place. None of them seemed concerned about facing her in combat. Warlord Zephron was waiting near the arena entrance, reviewing tactical data about his remaining opponents. When he saw Katie approaching, he stopped what he was doing and stared at her with what might have been amusement or curiosity. "So the little Deathworlder girl has decided to go through with this suicide mission," Zephron said in his rumbling voice. "I almost respect your species' capacity for pointless heroic gestures. When we fight, I will try to make your death quick and relatively painless." Katie met his yellow eyes without flinching and spoke in the same calm tone she always used. "Thank you for the consideration, Warlord Zephron. I will try to make our match interesting for the crowd." Zephron laughed as Katie walked past him into the arena where thousands of alien spectators waited to watch her die. Katie stepped onto the arena floor, and the massive crowd fell into an expectant silence. The metal surface beneath her feet was scarred from the previous battles, and still warm from the plasma blasts that had melted the last opponent into slag. She walked to the center of the fighting area with steady steps, while thousands of alien eyes watched her every movement. Her first opponent was the Vorthan Crystal Berserker, who had crushed his previous enemy without taking any visible damage. The massive crystalline being stood at the opposite end of the arena, flexing his arms and creating sounds like breaking glass as his crystal joints moved against each other. He was twice Katie's height and probably weighed 10 times as much. The crowd expected this match to be over in seconds. Katie could hear their excited chatter and see credits changing hands as aliens placed bets on how quickly the Berserker would finish her. Some were betting she would last less than 10 seconds, while the more generous estimates gave her maybe 30 seconds before the Crystal Warrior crushed her like he had done to his previous opponent. When the starting signal sounded, the Berserker charged across the arena with thunderous steps that shook the metal floor. His crystalline fists were raised and ready to smash the small human girl who stood waiting for him in the center of the fighting area. His yellow crystal eyes showed no emotion or hesitation as he prepared to end the fight with a single devastating blow. Katie did not try to run or dodge to either side. Instead, she waited until the Berserker was almost on top of her, then took 3 quick steps that positioned her exactly where she wanted to be. Her timing was perfect, and her movement was so precise that it looked almost like she was dancing with her massive opponent. As the Berserker's right fist came down toward her, Katie stepped slightly to her left and grabbed his wrist with both hands. She used his own momentum and weight against him by redirecting his charge in a way that sent him stumbling past her. At the same moment, she delivered a sharp elbow strike to the exact spot on his left shoulder where she had seen him flinch during his previous fight. The sound that came from the Berserker was unlike anything the crowd had ever heard. It was part roar of pain and part the sound of crystal cracking under pressure. The massive warrior stumbled and crashed to the arena floor, sending vibrations through the metal surface that could be felt in the spectator seats. Katie stood over her fallen opponent for a moment, then extended her hand to help him up. The Berserker stared at her in shock and confusion before accepting her assistance and struggling back to his feet. His left shoulder now showed visible cracks in the crystal structure, and he was clearly in pain. The arena erupted in stunned silence, followed by confused murmuring as the crowd tried to process what they had just witnessed. The unbreakable Vorthan champion had been defeated by a human girl who barely came up to his waist. More importantly, she had helped him up afterward, which was completely against normal gladiatorial protocol. Katie's second match was against the plasma-wielding champion from the gas giant colonies. The alien floated in his environmental suit and immediately began charging energy for his first attack. The crowd was much more attentive now as they realized that the human girl might be more dangerous than she appeared. The plasma wielder fired his first energy blast, and Katie moved just as the charging sequence completed. She had timed his attack pattern during his previous fight and knew exactly when he would be vulnerable. As the superheated energy passed harmlessly beside her, Katie sprinted forward during the 2-second cooldown period. The gas giant dweller tried to retreat while charging his next shot, but Katie was already too close. She grabbed one of the power cables that fed energy to his weapon systems and gave it a sharp twist that disconnected the connection. The plasma wielder's next shot fizzled out as harmless sparks instead of the devastating energy blast he had intended. Without his ranged weapons, the gas giant champion was helpless against Katie's close combat skills. She used techniques that looked like a combination of soccer footwork and playground, fighting to stay inside his guard where he could not bring his remaining weapons to bear. The match ended when she managed to damage his environmental suit enough that he had to surrender to avoid suffocation. Again, Katie helped her defeated opponent and made sure he could breathe properly before the medical team arrived. The plasma wielder looked at her with something like respect as he was escorted from the arena floor. Katie's third opponent was the machine warrior whose tactical programming had systematically dismantled its previous enemy. The combat unit scanned her with multiple sensors and began calculating probability matrices for the upcoming fight. Its mechanical voice announced that it had determined optimal strategies for defeating a human opponent. Based on available data, this was exactly what Katie had hoped for. She began moving in patterns that made no logical sense from a tactical standpoint. She would start to advance, then suddenly retreat or change direction for no apparent reason. Her movements looked random and chaotic but were actually carefully designed to confuse the machine's programming. The combat unit's tactical algorithms could not predict her next move because there was no logical pattern to follow. Its weapon systems kept trying to target her, but she was never where the probability calculations said she should be. The machine began making errors as its programming struggled to adapt to an opponent who was not following any recognizable combat doctrine. Katie waited for the machine to become overloaded with conflicting data, then struck at the one weakness she had identified during its previous fight. A small gap in its armor plating near the power core was just large enough for her to reach through and disconnect a critical component. The combat unit powered down with mechanical protests as its systems failed. The crowd was no longer silent or confused. They were beginning to understand that they were witnessing something unprecedented in galactic history. A human girl with no weapons or armor was defeating champions who had dominated their respective species for years or decades. In the preparation area, Ambassador Mitchell watched the matches on a viewing screen with growing amazement and terror. He had never imagined that Katie possessed fighting skills like these, but he also knew that her most dangerous opponent was still waiting. Warlord Zephron had been watching her fights with intense interest and was clearly adapting his strategy based on what he observed. Katie returned to the preparation area between matches and sat quietly while medical technicians checked her for injuries. She had sustained only minor bruises and cuts despite facing 3 of the galaxy's most dangerous fighters. Her breathing was slightly elevated, but otherwise she showed no signs of fatigue or stress. "How are you doing this, Ambassador?" Mitchell asked as he sat beside her. "Those were trained killers from warrior species, and you defeated them like they were children playing games." Katie looked at him with the same calm expression she had worn throughout the entire contest. "I grew up on Earth, Ambassador. Everything here is trying to kill you, but nothing here is as dangerous as a Detroit winter or a high school soccer championship game." The arena had never been so quiet as when Katie walked out to face Warlord Zephron in the final match. Every alien in the massive crowd leaned forward in their seats, trying to get a better view of the impossible confrontation that was about to take place. The small human girl who had already defeated 3 galactic champions now stood across from the most feared warrior in known space. Zephron entered the arena like a force of nature. His 8-foot frame moved with predatory grace, and his armored hide gleamed under the bright lights. The warlord's yellow eyes locked onto Katie as he strode to the center of the fighting area, and the crowd could feel the killing intent radiating from his massive form. This was not just another opponent to him now, but a genuine threat that needed to be eliminated. "I underestimated you, little Deathworlder," Zephron said as he stopped 20 feet away from Katie. His voice carried clearly across the arena, and the crowd hung on every word. "Your victories against the other champions were impressive, but they were not prepared for human tactics. I have been watching and learning from your fights." Katie nodded respectfully but said nothing as she had done throughout the entire contest. She continued her pattern of quiet observation and studied everything about the massive warlord who stood before her. The way he distributed his weight told her about old injuries, and the slight favoring of his right side confirmed what she had noticed during their first meeting days earlier. Zephron began demonstrating his strength for psychological effect. He grabbed a metal support beam that had been installed at the edge of the arena and tore it apart with his bare claws. The screech of rending metal echoed through the dome as he reduced the thick steel to twisted scrap. He then turned to a section of armored wall plating and punched through it like it was made of paper. The crowd roared its approval, and many of the alien spectators began chanting Zephron's name. They were reminded of why he had never lost a battle, and why the Carvex Empire dominated 3 sectors of space under his leadership. His display of raw power was meant to intimidate Katie, but she continued watching him with the same calm focus she had shown all day. "Your species calls you Deathworlders as a joke," Zephron continued as he flexed his claws and showed off the razor-sharp weapons that tipped each finger. "They think you are weak because you survived on a dangerous planet by hiding and avoiding conflict. But I have studied your fights today, and I understand what you really are." Katie finally spoke for the first time since entering the arena that morning. Her voice was quiet but carried clearly in the expectant silence. "What do you think we are, Warlord Zephron? You are persistence hunters." The Warlord replied with something that might have been respect in his tone. "Your species evolved to chase prey across vast distances until it collapsed from exhaustion. You do not give up and you adapt to any situation. This makes you more dangerous than most of the galaxy realizes." The starting signal sounded, and Zephron immediately charged with all the fury and speed that had made him legendary across known space. His claws were extended, and his powerful legs drove him forward like a living missile aimed directly at Katie's position. The crowd held its breath as 8 feet of armored death bore down on the small human girl. Katie took a single step forward. It was not a step backward in retreat, or to either side in evasion, but directly into the path of the charging warlord. Her timing was so perfect that it seemed impossible, and her positioning was flawless down to the inch. As Zephron's momentum carried him forward, Katie's step placed her exactly where his balance was most vulnerable. What happened next lasted less than 1 second, but every being in the arena would remember it for the rest of their lives. Katie's hands moved with precision that came from a lifetime of split-second decisions on a world where hesitation meant death. Her left hand redirected Zephron's charge using his own massive weight and momentum against him, while her right hand delivered a strike to the exact gap in his armor that she had identified during days of careful observation. The technique was not about strength or superior weapons, but about physics and timing and the kind of spatial awareness that only evolved on a planet where everything was constantly trying to kill you. Zephron's own devastating charge became the source of his downfall, as Katie's perfect redirection sent him crashing to the arena floor with enough force to crack the reinforced metal beneath his body. The silence that followed was complete and absolute. 847 victories and 0 defeats had just become 840. 7 victories and 1 defeat at the hands of a 19-year-old girl from Earth, who had never fought in gladiatorial combat before today. Katie walked over to where Zephron lay stunned on the cracked arena floor and extended her hand to help him up just as she had done with every other opponent. The massive warlord stared at her for a long moment before accepting her assistance and struggling back to his feet with obvious difficulty. "Good match," Katie said quietly as Zephron steadied himself. "Your technique was impressive and I learned a lot fighting against you." The warlord looked down at the small human, who had just ended his perfect record, and something like wonder entered his yellow eyes. "What are you?" he asked in a voice that was barely above a whisper. "I am Katie Johnson." "From Detroit, Michigan," she replied with a small smile. "I played midfielder on my high school soccer team and I really enjoy learning new languages." "Thank you for an interesting fight." The crowd finally found its voice and erupted in a roar that shook the entire trading station. Beings from dozens of species were on their feet cheering and shouting as they tried to process what they had just witnessed. The impossible had happened, and the galaxy would never be the same. Ambassador Mitchell rushed onto the arena floor with tears in his eyes and grabbed Katie in a bear hug that lifted her off her feet. Behind him came Admiral Blake and the rest of the human delegation, all talking at once and asking questions that Katie answered with her usual calm politeness. "Warlord." Zephron watched the celebration for a moment, then approached Katie once more. The crowd fell silent again as the defeated champion spoke to the victor who had changed galactic history. "The Carvex Empire formally withdraws all demands against human colonies," he announced in a voice that carried to every corner of the arena. "Any species that wishes to challenge humanity will have to go through the Carvex Empire first." Katie looked up at the massive alien who had just become humanity's most powerful ally and nodded respectfully. "Thank you, Warlord Zephron. I hope we can work together to make the galaxy a better place for everyone." As the crowd continued cheering and alien delegates rushed to renegotiate their treaties with humanity, Katie walked quietly toward the exit. She had a report to write and some translation work to catch up on before dinner.